while we were screening the film. I hope everyone was able to really watch it, and see it as it was meant to be. And I want to again thank you all for joining us. Um, that was a really heavy movie. I think this is probably the fourth or fifth time I've watched the documentary myself, and I would say each time it does not get easier. But I think instead of me talking, I actually want to. Um, I'm really grateful that we have Byron and Michelle today to join us on the call. So you actually have seen them in the documentary. We still have new people joining us, but I want to really do a proper introduction of both of them. So Byron is John and Lula Williams' great-grandson, and his mother, Leslie Christopher, is their son's granddaughter. Byron is also a musician. Michelle is the daughter of Mildred Blocker and sister of Jacqueline, who is also in the film. She is descended from Leona Corbett. Michelle is a storyteller and a voiceover actress. So without further ado, I just want to make sure you guys can see them. And I just wanted to make sure, are we able to see Byron as well? Awesome. Thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Before we screen the movie, I also was saying that if folks want to share any questions or thoughts in the chat, please feel free to do so. If you have questions for Michelle or Byron, please feel free to share them and we will ask them during this time. But I'm not seeing any questions right now, so I'll just start with some that I have, if that's okay with everyone. So I know that we didn't really have a lot of time to breathe between after watching the movie, but I actually just want to ask, how do you feel, after watching the movie yourself? Does it kind of bring up different things for you each time you watch it?
For me personally, absolutely. Even being involved in this documentary, every time I watch it, it's still fresh. It still hits you in various ways, and I guess a documentary like this will continue to do that until we do see some type of huge change when it comes to situations like this. But yeah, it still hits me as hard. So but I was so happy to be involved in something like that. The director, Miss Jefferson, did a fantastic job, and that was probably her goal, I'm assuming, to always even come away with it, if you've seen it before, with something new or something that kind of stays with you. So
Yeah, absolutely agree. It feels like this thing where at least for me personally, it feels like you kind of grow with your own experience of the documentary too, where it's like you come back to it a different person, you take away new things, but it still just kind of reopens the wound, especially as Michelle said, because it hasn't felt like any closure. It feels like something that honestly, I'm deeply thankful that I can do stuff like this, because it gives me some sense of mental peace, where it feels like even if we're not at the finish line, we still are doing something, right? And we still keep pushing, Yeah.
Yeah, thank you both for sharing that. And I'm sad to hear about in terms of like the fact that it feels like it's reopening a wound, right? Like the experiences that your family had and even yourself, right? That's still carrying this legacy. It's interesting because in the sense of someone in the chat was also just asking the question of how do you personally find closure, or have you even found closure? And I think closure means different things for different people, and I'm not sure if like, you know, would that be what you're seeking, right? Or what do you hope to, given the legacy, like how do you think about these and how do you process like closure?
Well, like you said, it's difficult to define closure because it's definitely kind of an individualistic thing of how you look at closure. Um, and this documentary touches on so many different levels as far as the past continuing and history continuing. And so for me, closure, I'm not necessarily looking for closure, but to see some type of change. You know, when the documentary was first released, it was after the 100-year, I don't like to call it anniversary because I always could equal that to something good, but it was after 100 years of the massacre. And as far as here, there was a lot of um, educational programs and things like this that were going on, but I don't necessarily think it was closure because, as Byron said, it is still kind of a wound that's opened, and we have definitely told more of the nation about this story. So when I don't necessarily think it's closure, but I have a positive outlook on the fact that more people know about this story, and um, as a whole, and also as individuals, you know, for Lulu and for my great grandmother Leona Corbett. I like I said, I don't think it's closure, but I just think it's good that we have a voice
Yeah,
now
absolutely.
in this documentary.
Yeah, it really does feel like this thing where, in a way, I wouldn't want the closure until there is. I wouldn't want personally to feel closure until it feels like there's some like collective community closure, you know. And I really like what someone said in the chat earlier about, they said they wish they would hear more stories about this, and I think that that it's like for there's just so many different ones, you know, and it feels like the type of thing where I feel like if this was like if this trauma was like a weed, right? It feels like doing things that are getting there but aren't there. It feels like, you know, we can cut the weed, we can tend to it, but for me to really feel that closure personally, I would want us to literally rip it out of the ground first, you know.
Yeah. And we actually got a couple more comments and questions in the chat. And I think maybe the best way to go about it is just for me to maybe read out the questions, and then, you know, depending on you know, what calls to you both, and then, you know, we can decide which to respond to first. So I'm seeing there's another question. Did you learn about this in school too? And then another question, which is, since our families did not discuss the massacre, how is it discussing it so much now? So, and that question, the second question is from Jacqueline. So, yeah. Um, which one would you both like to answer first?
Well, I'll answer the one about the education. Absolutely not. It was not taught in schools. I was told, I didn't personally go to a HBCU, but I was told that it's not even taught. Maybe now it's changed because of documentaries like this and because of the 100-year mark of the massacre. But this is not taught in schools. And I mean, you all can, everyone watching and whatnot can come to their own conclusion about why it's not. Because it was literally a Black Wall Street. It was a thriving, thriving part of history, not just locally, but nationally. So for it to not be discussed at all in educational, especially if it's local, you know, but in answer your question, no, it was not taught in schools. Even families, even Descendants, it was such a traumatic experience. It was not talked about. So therefore, even descendants didn't get to learn about it in school. So.
Yeah, I remember I started high school in 2012 and I graduated 2015. And the only experience I have with it being mentioned in I went to Booker T, which is the same one that Dado, the child in the car, went to, right? So this is the historically Black high school of Tulsa, right? So even me going to that one, my only experience I have hearing anyone mention it was basically, I remember there was one week where someone talked about it super briefly. It wasn't on the curriculum. You could just, if you wanted to, talk about it, and someone really briefly in Oklahoma history brought it up. But even then, we didn't go about it in a way that really framed how brutal and how impactful it was as an experience, right? And I think the only sort of person who I would like to shout out for giving the truth was Dr. Marshall, Anthony Marshall, who was the AP history teacher at Booker T when I was there. And he definitely went off script a whole lot and said things that needed to be said with I think the full magnitude of this stuff happened in American history, and this happened in Black American history, which is all of our history. And it needs to be said in its full, unfiltered magnitude, So I always like to give him flowers for that. I'm sad I didn't have his class because I heard it was too hard. I was kind of scared, but yeah.
And how about, I guess, the second question of, I think Michelle, you also touched upon it a little, but because you all were not able to learn about it in school, and Jacqueline mentioned that your families did not discuss about the massacre, right? Like while you were growing up. So how is it like discussing it so much now? And perhaps I had another question, but I will leave it there for now. How does it feel like to discuss it so much now?
It's difficult to, of course, discuss, but it needs to be discussed. It's kind of, and you have to talk it out in order to get through it. And like I had said before, due to the 100-year mark, it became a conversation. As difficult as it may be, it needs to be talked about. And coming from the storytelling background that I have, it's just pertinent to keep it in your mind and thoughts for educational, because like the saying goes, if you don't learn from history, it'll keep repeating itself. And of course, some people may be saying, oh, well, that can't happen. But in some ways, there are various little massacres going on, even as we speak, because there are many things that need to be changed and even discussed more. And even through discussing it, sometimes you don't come to a necessary, you don't come to a conclusion, because this is such a broad subject. But having the conversation brings other ideas and brings other people's ideas in, and it just needs to be definitely talked about.
Yeah. Could you repeat the question one more time, please?
The question is, since our families did not discuss the massacre, how is it like discussing it so much now?
Honestly, I think I'm happy that it is happening. It's also really difficult, because I think for me personally, like my mom said in the video, like her grandpa, Dado, the boy in the car, he didn't ever talk about it because he lived through it at 16, right? And so it's really difficult when you internalize those habits as a family, and the way it kind of impacts how you even communicate it to others outside your family, let alone to the people in your family, like me to my mom, right? It makes it really difficult to navigate in a way. And I'm also glad that in a way it does feel healing, because of the fact that now that we are like propelled to talk about it, it feels like it helps us undo the habits that are really painful, that come from having to feel like you need to suppress it to survive. Like Dado going to work the next day and washing dishes, like he felt like, oh, I have to do this to survive. I have to always be in go mode. And I think that really informs how you discuss it to everyone, you know?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Um, I also want to ask, because there's so much, I feel like you mentioned, maybe suppression or just, like these stories not being shared. But, I think I also want to hear a little about what does it mean for you both personally to be involved in the making of this film, in the process, or, how were you first looped into it? If you don't mind sharing that with us.
Actually, my sister Jacqueline Blocker, who's featured in this as well, unfortunately was not able to attend, but I think she's watching. So, she was the one that was contacted about it, and then of course reached out to my mother and I if we were interested in it, and um, I never thought about it, but we were just very up for it. We were like, yeah, this would be great. And of course, we trusted who it was from. It was from my sister. So that's how I got on board. And then, of course, you still are kind of little apprehensive about, oh, how is this going to go? And then again, many kudos to Miss Jefferson and the entire crew, because they are the ones that kind of laid the groundwork for it to develop to the point where we're able to open up, and and you see what was displayed. But yeah, it was an amazing experience, and due to Miss Jefferson and the crew, we were able to really open up, and I think you know um, give Leona Corbett a voice that she did not have, and many of her community members did not have.
Yeah.
Is there a
Um,
second part to that question, or?
I think also I was also asking how it was like in the making of the film, right? Like what does it mean to you personally? I feel like you guys touched on it before a little already. But I'm also curious about like how was it like making the film? Like participating in it with your family.
It
Yeah.
was for me, it was fantastic to especially be with my mother and her talk about her um, grandmother, and just to actually sometimes we heard a few stories that we hadn't heard before because of this documentary. So that scene that we're at the table, there was a point where we forgot the cameras were on because we were really into like looking at these pictures and having my mom talk, and that was all authentic. It was not staged. It really was a great experience, but I am very blessed to be close with them anyway. So it wasn't like I didn't know them and then we got thrown together. But yeah.
Yeah. No, yeah, yeah. And echoing what Michelle said, it felt like this kind of like mutual like understanding our family more. Like for instance, I'd never heard my great grandfather's voice until I heard that recording. So I think on a personal level it was deeply I learned a lot about myself, and I think that really I'm thankful for that, because you I felt like I just came into a world and I didn't really understand like why my mom acted the way they did, or how that made me act a certain way. Because she's really private, so so it
Mm.
was hard to, yeah. Even in, like how I remember learning about Black Wall Street, it was in like snippets, like very much like PG. Then it got PG-13. Then eventually, like, and this is through the grapevine, just slowly blossoming into its rawness. Where as I got older, I guess my mom felt like I could kind of possibly like emotionally grasp and handle it you know, as I matured. So I think that to answer your question, it felt again healing in a way, and I think yeah, I'm happy it happened. I'm really happy it happened. Yeah.
I think we have a couple of comments in the chat. Folks were sharing about their experiences. Actually, there was a comment from Francie that said, I had the privilege of knowing Catherine Williamson serve as an appointed member of Community Board number 7 to save Latimer House, the museum that I'm working at, and successfully advanced the first historic landmark acknowledgement. Many pebbles paved the endless path of truth. Thank you for sharing that, Francie. And there are other folks that have also made comments about, like, such as now, Meredith said, now they're passing laws that would make it more difficult to get into the school curriculum. I am thinking about this in relation to the comments that have been made about critical race theory, but that is a whole other topic, it feels. Francie also said the amount of Black wealth that was misappropriated is incalculable, definitely. I think there is actually a comment. I'm sorry for skipping other folks. But I saw that someone had shared that they're originally from Oklahoma, and part of my family is from Tulsa. I never heard about it at school. When I studied Oklahoma history in school, there was no word of this. I always thought how it was ridiculous because it's part of Oklahoma history. I'm too afraid to see if any of my family were involved. Thank you for sharing that. I think in relation to this comment, like, and I feel like we have touched on it in the beginning, but has there been any changes in Tulsa in particular since you all have shared what has happened, or in you know, this film being screened so widely?
I mean, I think that's the tricky part, is it feels like I'm thankful that so many people are more aware of it. And at the same time, it feels like a lot of Tulsa institutions, especially during the centennial, were doing a lot of performative change. And I think that kind of echoes back as well about someone saying that they're doing things to try and stop legislative moves to try and stop it from being taught in schools. It feels like it kind of mirrors the same thing that's been happening, which is white Tulsans knowing that this is awful in a genocide, and then kind of, instead of reconciling that in like the deep, fundamental, and righteous way, it feels like this thing where it feels a lot of time performative change. And then when you get down to the policy and the nitty gritty of how people really change the way they move in the day to day, you don't really see that. And that's really disheartening on a personal level, being a Tulsan to see, right? It's like, and now it's more deeply upsetting because since the 100-year centennial has passed, it's less trendy. So it's the type of thing where now we see really, what do the powers that be, how do they act towards Greenwood and Black Wall Street when the cameras aren't looking anymore? And what's the sort of sustainable longevity that we can have as a Black community in Tulsa, given the fact that this big day happened and there still hasn't been the deep reparations that need to happen, right? So, yeah.
Thank you. How about you, Michelle? Do you have any thoughts on that as well?
Well, yeah, and also it's all how you define. I agree absolutely with Byron. I think he said it quite well, but it also depends on what you consider change. You know, some people could say, "Oh, it's a change because we're just talking about it," and I feel like I'm a little impatient, and I agree with Byron. I feel like it was the thing to do during the 100-year, the centennial, and lives move on, things move on, and it's not as heavy on people's minds around here as it was. But it's such a it has to be such a collective movement. And it's very hard to do that sometimes when a certain trend or whatever has passed on. yeah, I would love to see a lot more change, and I would love to see a lot more legislatively, like people really just basically, like Byron said, making it the forefront as it was as far as trying to make a change and acknowledging it, um, and still kind of keep the heat on the fire, you know.
Yeah, when you both said that, one thing that came to my mind is definitely also, with the Lewis Latimer House Museum and Lewis Latimer's story, because, we shouldn't just give attention to what happened in Tulsa because like from last year, because it was the 100th year that it happened, right? It's like there's this broader need to just for people to know about it, like and February is usually like Black History Month, but there's actually no particular month you should learn about history, right? Like we should be learning about it like at any given moment, just because, right? Like we need to be able to, at least from my understanding, like acknowledge what had happened and actually contribute to these like policy legislative like changes, or else it could really just feel like like folks such as yourself is opening up about your experiences, or and then it's like a re-traumatizing almost. um I I feel like we've we've touched on a lot of heavy things, but another question that, or another question that we got is, what are your thoughts about the freeway? I guess in relation to the current developments in Greenwood and Tulsa now. Like, does it affect, like, does it, because there's been gentrification, and actually Jacqueline mentioned this in her comment as well, the tax dollars from Greenwood today do not go to North Tulsa, which is majority Black. This is the result of redistricting, rezoning. Like,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Um, well, like in the documentary, when I read the John Hope Franklin quote, that is exactly a definite, um, it's a definite move to put a freeway through it. If anybody knows anything about redlining, gentrification, all that, it's definitely a huge obstacle. I mean, it's I now, is it making or breaking Greenwood? It has a huge effect on it. That was purposely done, and it seems like physically and metaphorically, it just cuts it off. You know, the freeway just really just cuts it off, and that's why I love that scene when Byron's underneath the bridge and the sounds of it, and I feel like it's a very, very poignant piece of that documentary to show not only the detriment, like it shows literally how they threw the freeway through there, and it's kind of an acknowledgement of them trying to break it down in a sense. And when I say them, I mean the laws and whatnot and the redlining. That's what I mean. Also, I do want to add too that I know a lot, I shouldn't say a lot, but there are people that also will say this happened 100 years ago. Isn't it up to, like, isn't it about time that it's up to the people now to bring it up? You cannot go on the past. But I remember reading about elephants, especially female elephants, they do not have tusks anymore. And it's because of ivory poaching. From years and years of ivory poaching, it came to the point where literally they are not born with tusks because of ivory poaching. And these are animals. So if you really look at something like that, that is so ingrained in an animal that the next generation doesn't even grow a certain thing. Think of 100 years and what happened to our families and that trauma. You don't think that carries on to families and generations? So that's why it's important to talk about things from 100 years ago, because it does have an effect on the generation and the community.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's still difficult for me to try and not just overwork myself. That's why my eyes are like right now. It's because it feels like I feel tired right now. It's hard for me to undo, like Michelle was saying, that kind of elephant habit of trying to just keep going, keep working, you know? And it feels like, talk about like another figurative elephant that's literally in the room. It's like, it feels like when you're going when you're going around in Tulsa, you can tell that even white people have this like sense of awareness now. And it feels like that type of thing where if you've ever had beef with a friend and they know they should bring it up, but then they don't, and then they try and act natural, but you can tell that there's this subdued anxiety and all this repression from them. And then the way that, yeah, the way it just taints the interaction is like literally, I think a lot of white people in Tulsa don't know that it would also be in their best interest as well as ours to reconcile this, right? So there's this odd elephant in the room of like, yeah, it felt congruent to when the George Floyd protests were happening. And for me, I live in LA now, and it felt like for me living out here, there was this 1 week span of like this like increased kind of like hyper visibility of my selfhood, just being Black and just existing. And also paired with that, it felt like there's this interesting kind of role reversal where it felt like they were walking on eggshells more than me for a change, as in like general white people out in LA. I think there was a congruency there because it felt like for that 1 week, there was this deep awareness of like, oh, we know these things that need to be reconciled. How do we acknowledge this? Oh, but I also don't want to. And I felt like that you really feel that in Tulsa as well. You know, you feel like there's this deep sense of not only just being Black in Tulsa, but also when you have to go out into the white world in Tulsa, or white spaces, that is, you really feel this elephant in the room, you know?
I actually also want to throw in this question. Since I am based in New York City, I wonder if, and I'm not sure if everyone here knows about like the geography of Greenwood and Tulsa. I wonder, like, is it very like racially segregated there? Like, still in a way where there's a very clear like kind of like difference in inequality like that exists out depending on which area you're at, because this is the case in New York City. I feel you know, we see Brooklyn being gentrified, and Queens is actually that neighborhood as well. Like Flushing sees a lot of immigrants from Hong Kong and Taiwan, including my family. And before that, there were also was I wouldn't say it's a historically Black district because when Lewis Latimer moved in, it was predominantly white, but there was a very prominent Black community in between the times of 1920s to like 1980s. So you know, that is still a very significant history. But going back to the question, I wonder how is that in Tulsa?
It's still really apparent, I think. I mean, it used to be divided at the Admiral Railroad tracks, and literally you still feel that immediately when you cross the railroad tracks going into North Tulsa. You can tell it immediately gets more industrial. You can tell that there's more pollutants. You can tell that there's like less property value immediately. So there's still these hard barriers. I think gentrification is pushing up there, like we said, pushing especially on Greenwood now. And you can tell that, especially because of the fact that a lot of Black businesses on Greenwood have to pay rent to white people, right? So it's like, I think deeply, you see these institutional powers pushing in a certain direction. And I think that you definitely feel this racial and wealth discrepancy. And I literally make it a point every time I go back, partly because my dad lives in an apartment south, so I physically have to go to his house. But basically, I go down Lewis, which is one of the main north-south streets, and it's really it really feels like this embodiment of the disparity, because going north southbound from North Tulsa, you see railroad tracks, BAM, coffee shops, development, gentrification, and then you go and then you see just the heart of white Tulsan houses, and you see this just unadulterated wealth that we could have had, you know. So yeah, you definitely still see it and feel it when you come to Tulsa.
Michelle, was there anything you wanted to add before I maybe I think we should take a break, because we've been going, having this discussion for a bit. Perhaps we can all take collective deep breaths, as maybe for the rest of the conversation we can also open it up for audience to participate, because I actually see a lot of active comments in the chat as well, and I don't want to deny anyone of the right to be part of this conversation. Michelle, do you have any thoughts about the question, perhaps do you want to add?
No. Not right now.
Yeah. Thank you both so much. And I think for now, let us all take a 5-minute break. If you need to, feel free to turn off your camera and mic, and I'll check back in with all of you then. And in the meantime, I feel like I'll tell you all later. I'll see you all in 3:45. I'll be here, but feel free to take a break, go use the bathroom, whatever you need to do to take care of yourself. It is now 3:45, so I'm just gonna go ahead and get us started. Um, I want to thank you all again for being a part of the conversation. And for those who have been very active in the chat, I would like to invite you now if you would like to either use the raise hand function or let me know in the chat if you would like to share any thoughts. Um, as currently, from the past panel, it's just been mostly me asking my own questions to Byron and Michelle, but you can also take this opportunity to ask these questions yourself or, just have a conversation together. We have time until 4:20, so, the floor is open if anyone wants to participate. If not, I'll just continue to ask questions. And, hopefully it will help us all in reflecting on the documentary. Maybe, to start, maybe we can do like a temperature check. I know a lot of folks are mostly muted, and you don't have your cameras on, but maybe, just for me to get a sense of how everyone's feeling. If you're feeling okay, would you be able to give me a thumbs up emoji or, kind of leave a comment in the chat if you're feeling good? Okay, so I see Jihan saying that doing good. If you're feeling so-so, would you be able to maybe show me like a like another I'm sorry, I'm trying to find the emojis available, but like the old shape emoji. Okay, I see a heart emoji from Francie. Thank you so much. For other folks, maybe you're just listening in and that is also fine. But does anyone want to participate? You have any, questions or thoughts you'd like to share? It doesn't have to be just questions, so it could just be your own thoughts based on, watching a documentary. I just want to make sure. I hope I don't mispronounce your name, but Tila? Would you like to share with us? You feel free to, oh, I see Francie, you have your hand raised. Please feel free to unmute yourself and we'll love to hear from you.
Thank you, Roxy, so much. And thank you so much to the guests. What great courage it takes to bear witness to history, but especially profound to bear witness to one's own blood history. Takes great courage, great courage. And I think in the big picture, the power of this documentary is that it exposes the fact that the Civil War never ended. It pretended to end. The Civil War never ended. And the Black massacre in Tulsa bears monumental witness, in my opinion, to that truth. The documentary also, in my opinion, highlights the fact that after the alleged end of the Civil War and the period of Reconstruction, which in many ways was so brilliantly aspirational, yet failed and ushered in the savagery of the Jim Crow laws. There could never have been, in my opinion, the Black massacre at Tulsa, but for the Jim Crow seeds. So I'm wondering if either or both of you would comment on how you view contextually in American history the fact that this documentary again illuminates the trail out of the faux ending of the Civil War, and how, of course, inevitably, in light of that faux ending, there would, of course, be the Black Massacre in Tulsa. And one other comment, this past Friday was the anniversary of the Continental Congress's ratification of the Paris Treaty with Britain, the second so-called Paris Treaty, which acknowledged, number one, the end of that civil war, if you will, an international conflict with Britain. And it also, that Paris Treaty also acknowledged, by virtue of the treaty, that there were then 13 former colonial held states that became the United States of America. So a little over 240 years ago, this past Friday, the legal document that enshrined the creation of the United States of America was ratified by the Continental Congress. But there's also another provision in that treaty which stated that any property, chattel of British soldiers, you know that old expression, to the victor belong the spoils? Any property or chattel of British soldiers that was still within those 13 former British colonies, now the United States of America, any such chattel or property of British soldiers must remain in the United States of America, including Negroes and slaves. That was the big moment where we could have changed history and made it right and real. But instead, that provision of the treaty was signed off on, acknowledging that Negroes and slaves would not be freed, but would remain in that status, notwithstanding the fact that we, quote unquote, won the war and the British had to get out of town. So if you could reflect on that line of events, 240 plus years ago, then to 1865, then up through the 1900s, up until the massacre, do you see a line that perforce persists to this day because of the failure to own the wrong and make it right? Thank you.
Yeah, I think the last thing you said was a pretty good synopsis. I think it is the difficulty to really live with a responsibility that is deeply problematic like that when you have either human exploitation or greed, which were the fundamentally, I think, the two things that these things were about, right? A lack of empathy and greed. And I think that, like you said, with the Paris Agreement, or like leading up to the massacre, the kind of context that Oklahoma was in, there actually, that I literally read on that year a really good book about it, which is written by a white dude, funny enough. But it was called Death of the Promised Land, and basically similar to what you're alluding to, there's all this historic context behind it, like they were saying in the video, they thought about making Oklahoma a black state as well. Unionization efforts, it could have been maybe more quasi-socialist state. So there were a lot of kind of waves moving in different directions right leading up to the riot or massacre. Sorry, see, still in my brain. Leading up to the massacre, and it's interesting to see how, like you were alluding to, how both not really willing to reconcile with that personal story that you know is true, that, oh, I did this wrong thing, so let me change the story, is what goes in people's heads a lot. So basically, like that coupled with greed, you really see how these waves kind of echo each other over and over through these different eras, right? So I think it's really interesting to note that through all of this, that actually was talked about in the book as well, how humans naturally desire to have a story that they can feel comfortable with, right? And I think that's a big reason why literally it wasn't talked about at all, because I think, well, I remember growing up and learning about Christopher Columbus in school in a ridiculous way, learning about slavery in school in a very watered down way, all of these historic atrocities that were watered down, or I think in Tulsa's case, not talked about at all, because they knew how difficult it would be to even utter it, right? So I think that I'm saying all this to say that, yeah, thank you for that comment. I think it's really important to view, view the Tulsa Race Massacre in a lens that is humanistic and also that's context focused, right? So it really brings out, I think it makes what's happening now make a lot more sense. Yeah.
Yeah, France, is that how you pronounce Francie? That was so well
Thank
put.
you.
And I really, and I think you did this purposefully, use the word savagery, and that kind of resonated with me, because to make laws out of fear of, I feel like there's some underlying fear of that Black Wall Street happening again. There is some underlying fear, and by God, people are going to make laws so that will not happen. And I mean, actually, I'm still kind of processing what you said. It was I mean, historically, there is a through line to this. And I think what is very, 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 he used the term watered down, is the idea that whatever you create and make will be destroyed. That is something that is, I feel like, in the back, unbeknownst to Descendants, even a lot of Tulsa residents, it's something that is kind of in the back of our minds, is like, you can't have anything nice, to put it in layman terms, because it will get destroyed. And a lot of people will say, well, your own people will destroy it. Well, if you are used to a certain way of being treated and it's been generational, you almost feel like, unbeknownst to you, you don't deserve it. I don't even deserve it. So I'm not even going to try, because it's going to be taken away. And to have that generationally, and then also have laws like rezoning, redistricting to back that up, that's a pretty hard race. As Byron put earlier, we're still in the race, but man, we've got a lot of weights on us as we're running. Well, Francie, you kind of got me hyped up with that. That was very that was very well put. And I'm really, really glad that you because I will never say that I'm a person that knows statistics 100%, but you putting the statistics behind it really kind of drives the point that it's not just about it's just not about reconciliation. There's so many other things that need to be absolved before that. So I hope that made sense.
Thank you.
I also want to invite Jihan. I see that you have your hand raised. Would you like to also mute yourself and share your thoughts with us?
Sure. Peace. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. Peace and power, everyone. My name is Jahan Thomas. I'm a Black woman visual artist and educator from Philadelphia. So I'm really thankful to be here. I love Lewis Latimer, and I really am thankful to be, you know, in your presence and hearing your stories in this documentary. So, you know, and you know, be with everybody. So more power to you all. First of all, number one, Michelle, get hype, because it's definitely something to get hype about. So I definitely will, you know, accept that hype, get hype about it, you know, and just thinking about, and, you know, thank you, Byron, you know, thinking about an educational standpoint, you know, making those correlations to tangible history. And that, you know, Michelle, you mentioning about your storytelling background. I mean, storytelling is valid, you know, but not through the lens of this, you know, education systems, and, you know, and it's structural, you know, that our various narratives, you know, specifically as Black people, aren't indoctrinated in the school system. But, you know, thinking like, okay, so what's a tangible something that could happen? I mean, if we got people who are majoring, quote unquote, in business and whatnot, economics and things like that, I mean, we should be talking about, you know, Black Wall Street. We should be in an economics class, in a business class, you know, those intersections, I think definitely need to happen. And that can be a way that, you know, you bring in these interdisciplinary narratives. But we all know that it's just so structural that you would have to have supplemental, you know, supports for an educator, for that educator to even attempt to do those things. And we know that there's a lot of, like you said, weights, Michelle, you know, keeping people from making that an intention in the classroom. But I'm telling you, you know, let's do it. Let's write a textbook. I write curriculum. Let's, you know, holla at me. You know, we shoot, I know it's already happening. We wouldn't be the first ones, but I'm down for that. And especially, you know, a lot of Black communities across the nation and the world, you know, have been terrorized, you know, and there's a, you know, I forget exactly what the book is called, but there's a specific, you know, framework to what goes into our history books. And, you know, nothing against, you know, the white regular, you know, all the stuff, you know, can't go into our textbook. So there's actually like a actual template to what goes into our American textbook. So and it's not, I don't know if that's going to change, but the supplemental information that we could offer, you know, classes for high school and, you know, Zoom classes. I mean, that's kind of where I'm at, like offering you know, a more well-rounded perspective on our histories in the diaspora, but through supporting educators outside the classroom, or, you know, so just more power to you. Holla at me if we could write it up, you know, so thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much for sharing. Byron, Michelle, do you all have any comments? Would you like to respond? I'm also, I just want to say I'm very excited for that. Thank you so much for sharing. I feel like when you're talking about creating curriculum, it really echoes what we do at the museum, because, you know, even before myself, I only started working at the museum from last August, but there's been a really like a lot of folks before me who have put together, you know, materials, right, like doing the research on Lewis Latimer. And a lot of that is also possible because his granddaughter, Winifred Latimer Norman, she's the one, along with her brother Gerald, that really pushed for not only the house to be preserved, but there's been research that's been done, you know, partnering with the Queen's Public Library, that, you know, is really what goes towards the education that we do now. We actually have tours that, you know, we do at school where we talk to kids, you know, 5th grade or, you know, even younger about Lewis Latimer, but we also incorporate a lot of that because Lewis Latimer, he was a strong believer of art and science. He was someone who not only, you know, worked on patents, right? Like he was a painter, he was a playwright, wrote poems, taught himself 5 languages. And, you know, so he's really extraordinary. And, you know, we try to really do a lot of what we do is really through that spirit, through his spirit. I actually see another hand up, but I wish, oh yeah, Michelle, of course.
comment on, I didn't want to mispronounce her name, so that's why I didn't say anything. Is it Jihan?
Oh, Jahan. The I sounds
Jahan.
like an A, so I appreciate that.
Yeah, that was fantastic what you said. And I went to Temple for a while, so I'm very familiar with Philly. But what I also wanted to say is, yeah, I agree with you. Maybe if they're going to do this thing where it's like not in the classrooms, take it out of the classroom. You know, we'll educate. Storytelling it's not a thing of ancient folklore. Storytelling needs to still be, storytelling doesn't have to be telling stories. It's literally, maybe there'll be a emergence of storytelling, because obviously they want to keep the real stories out of the schools when it comes to race. Maybe it's up to people like you and I that have to be the storytellers of that aspect outside of school. And, I think these generations are up for wanting to move beyond what they just learned in the template, as you explained, that is put in our history books. And Byron touched on it too. It's like, I remember in my school, there was literally like a little corner and it showed these slaves in a boat. They talked about a little bit, let's move on. That's your history, so I appreciate what you said. And yeah, we got to keep talking. As simple as it sounds, we all need to continue the conversation that has been used and used, but it's still tried and true.
I would say, maybe it would be great if y'all can connect after the event as well. I think part of why we really want to, host this event is also so that we can really, workshop together, and continue to really like contribute to change, and not just, talk about what had happened, but actually, make sure that this could be something that builds towards momentum for the future, for future generations to know, right? Not only to know, but to really like confront these systemic, like racism that still plagues this country. And I say that as someone who is an immigrant, but it doesn't absolve me of any of that, right? Like we're all a part of this, and that's not the best segue, but we do have someone else who raised their hand. I hope I'm not mispronouncing your name, Savi. And if you would like to just take a moment to introduce yourself and share with us any thoughts.
Hi, thank you. Thanks so much. It's Xavier, or Javi, or Zavi for short. Michelle, Byron, thank you so much. And actually, there is a good segue, because I'm going to go back to what Michelle was saying about storytelling. And I keep hearing this undercurrent about language and education in our, or miseducation more likely, in our conversation. And I'm originally from Texas. I live in San Francisco now, but I mentioned how lucky or how fortunate I was to be at the time in elementary school with some really, I guess you could say, like those teachers that went off script, like Byron was saying. So I learned things that, as in elementary school, I didn't think twice about it, because it just felt like it was the right curriculum. But I didn't realize I grew up in a segregated neighborhood. I didn't realize why most of my teachers were Black. And I just didn't realize these things until later on in life, when I start talking to other Black people, and you realize, oh, wow, you didn't learn any of that in elementary school. My teachers went off book, and it shouldn't count on luck though. And it shouldn't count on fortune that you would learn that. And trauma gets passed down, and we have a tradition of verbal storytelling. And I think, I always try to like step back, whatever I'm doing, whether it's storytelling or, just the lived Black experience in general. But I always like to take a step back at things and ask, what is the story and who's controlling the narrative? And is someone trying to get me to think or to believe something about any particular topic in history? And this is a perfect example. And so we probably will continue to see those institutional blocks try to poke their head. But my glimmer of hope is is people like Byron and Michelle and others. Like you said, Michelle, let's keep talking. Let's keep that storytelling tradition alive. If I never saw this movie, if I never heard anything about Greenwood, if I could just encourage us all to keep storytelling and stop passing the trauma down. At some point, it's like where does the buck stop? And again, yeah, I just want to echo that. Let's all keep talking and keep telling the story. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I love what you said about just highlighting the importance of language. Because if a lot of people in here don't know, before it was called the Tulsa Race Massacre, it was called the Tulsa Race Riot, right? So there was this narrative that happened for so long where it was like, it was kind of depicted as an equal sides thing, like we just like lined up in the octagon and squared up, but that's not how it was, right? So it's like, I really think. And another thing that what you said thought made me think of was my mother had this book collection because I didn't even know growing up, but she was like in just like clubs in the 70s where she would like talk to like like Black Panther ideas and stuff like that. So I had this kind of like book collection from her that was in our house all the time, which had all this like Black history by Black people for Black people, FUBU. And it was wild, like you were saying, when you feel so disjunct because you hear one thing through the grapevine at home and you hear one thing at school, and it feels like this kind of like dual memory where you kind of like it's hard not to have doubts about yourself or your own community when it's like there's so many people telling you that your whole reality is wrong or the way that you're experiencing it is wrong. Yeah, it's hard, but I'm thankful we have it. Yeah, football all day.
And Byron, I'll just touch on this. Byron is absolutely correct. It was known as the Tulsa Race Riot, up until like the 100th, the centennial. Everyone, even if those people were brave enough to talk about it, they referred to it as the riot, which is always softer on the ear, right, than a massacre, which it really was. But a riot, like he said, it does make it seem like, whoa, there was like a little bit of an equal. Absolutely not. So language is so important.
Thank you guys so much. Thank you. And thank you all for correcting the language too, like we still see a lot of that, even how language divides us, like even the smallest things, like, you can say Black Lives Matter, or you can say all lives matter. And without any sort of context, you could take those two statements entirely wrong. And I think that's happening to us. And, again, yeah, let's keep talking. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for sharing. And I see our chat is very active. Is there someone, other folks who would like to share if you haven't already? Or, folks who have spoken before, you're welcome to also unmute yourself if you would like to contribute comments. I see a question. Do you speak to any of the descendants of people that burned down Greenwood?
Well, not personally. I'm not going to speak for Byron, but that would be a very interesting. I just pictured like a panel of like descendants of ownership and those that were related to the looters and the murders. I personally don't know anyone, but I'm sure there's a shame to it. I don't know if they're out there or still live here, if they would be raising their hands like, hey, my dad. I mean, it'd be great because it'd probably be cleansing for them, but I personally do not know of any descendants on the other side of the massacre now.
Yeah, I think it's the same for me. I don't personally know if they are. I grew up in a decent amount of white spaces and also historically Tulsan spaces. So I feel like those two together, there had to be some people that I was around, like elementary school or even high school at my historically Black high school, that had to be that. But I think it's so interesting that, especially when you see like how white Tulsans have reacted to the centennial and all this, it does feel like something that is the I think in its best case, in good faith, has been an attempted reconciliation. And I think the interesting part is a lot of times that a lot of times it might not be pointed inward into the introspection of like, was my family part of it, or they aren't like out, so to speak, about their family being part of it. But like Michelle said, I agree that that would be healing for them and for us. And yeah, it would be, I think, refreshing to actually talk to them if they came forward. Yeah.
We also have Tila's hand up. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, but yeah, she is the one that originally asked the question. So yeah, please feel free to unmute yourself and share with us. Love to hear you.
Okay, hi. I'm sorry, my throat is kind of bad. Anyways, would you be interested in talking to them about it? And if they apologize to you, would you accept it?
I would absolutely be interested in talking with them. I've never been a person that expects an apology from somebody who didn't do what they're apologizing for. So I really I don't know how I would take that, because in a sense you can't get that apology from that person because they may have passed. There may be some survivors, because there are a few survivors of the actual massacre that are still alive, as many of you may know. If it was an actual person that was a part of the massacre and they apologize, that is a very good question. I mean, that out of all these I've done, I've never had that question. It depends on how they come about it. I don't know, because then I would be accepting an apology on behalf of my great grandmother, Leona Corbett, and I don't know if she would accept it. So I would love to have a conversation, but as far as forgiving and asking for forgiveness, I'm not quite sure about that. But as far as like having a convo, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think um it feels like you I think I'll start by saying that I would have some degree of thankfulness and respect for someone to, especially if they were the ones who did that event, to come forward and say it, uh, because that takes a lot, especially when you hopefully have a lot of guilt about it. And at the same time, like Michelle said, I would feel hesitant to accept the apology unconditionally for like kind of behalf of my whole community, and especially I'm the type of person who like my kind of like apology love language is action. So it's like, to me, it matters more that you really just take steps to never do the thing that hurt me ever again, and also to reconcile for that thing. Like that to me feels palpably more like an apology than your words, to me personally. So I'm the type of person where you coming forward and saying you did it is an action that I would deeply, sincerely appreciate. And I think it would be I think I would just want it to be the start of that apology and not the period, because I don't want it to be just like, you know, I can sin 6 days a week and just repent on the 7th and be straight. You know, it's like I would not want that. You know.
Um,
Oh, thank you. I'm originally from Tulsa. My father's side is from Tulsa, so I think one of the elders was the one that told me about it because, like I said earlier, we didn't learn about this in school.
Thank you for the question. And I feel like, you know, this is, you know, some, again, a possible, you know, the conversation, again, you know, could be a possible action in the future, but it feels like it's something that, you know, maybe needs to be initiated by, you know, folks, right, like that are a part of the, who have that, like, heritage. I don't think that's the best way to put it, but you know, for them to really like I mean, I hope that could happen one day, but again, you know, it's not like guaranteed like that. It could be a healing experience as well. It seems like, you know, maybe, you know, ultimately, like Byron, you were saying, I actually really like your quote. You said, your like apology love language is action, right? Like maybe like action is really ultimately what would really be more meaningful than the conversation itself, because maybe conversation could also be, like you were saying, it could be an end, you know, people feel like it just ends there and then there's no follow through, right? Like it could be, it feels like a performance, and maybe like Michelle, you're saying, right, it's not something that you could also like accept on behalf of, you know, your family. Tila, and I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, but you know, you say you have another question.
Yes. When somebody says to you it's 100 years ago and they say get over it, how do you feel about that and what's your response?
I've never personally had somebody approach me with that because they know better. No, I'm kidding. I haven't been approached with those words, but sometimes you could kind of feel a question or an idea kind of dangling in the room. I'm a big person on energy, and I've just from other issues and other unfortunate events, I've heard people say, well, you know, that was so long ago, why don't they get over it? I would probably mention, like I did earlier, about the elephant and the tusk analogy, and the idea that trauma is passed on, whether you like it or not. Genetically, it is passed on. We are all animals, and it is passed on. So if somebody were to approach me with that, I would probably have to sit them down. If they have the, you know, if they felt the need to say that, I would have to educate them as far as genetic trauma and how things, it doesn't matter how long ago it was, depending on the detriment of it, it can last until the last days. So I would just try to educate them.
I just want to make sure, Byron, do you have any thoughts you would like to share before I invite the next audience member to comment?
No, not really. I think Michelle said it really great.
Yeah. Thank you both for answering that. And you know, it could be again, that's us, you know, that could be heavy, right? But thank you both for taking the time to you know, address some of these things. And Francie, you have your hand raised, so I also want to just invite you. You'll be the last person to comment, because we're 5 minutes to end time. So I'll just pass it to you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Roxy. There's nothing like talk. It's cheap, but talk is cheap. Time is money, and it is obviously of invaluable significance in all our lives. And this is about history, and history is an ongoing dance in search of a faithful partner. So if I may suggest to you, Michelle, my belle in particular, I'm putting it on you, sister. Oklahoma is okay in terms of skin in the game, in part because it has the richest oil fields in the country. And in some would argue, in some respects, it has the largest, if not the most productive. Currently, the Biden administration's initiative with respect to Build Back America Better is going to impact on the dynamism of Oklahoma and Oklahomans in interfacing with that vast reservoir of ongoing wealth. Major corporations have grown their wealth off of the natural resources of Oklahoma. I would so entreat you with my head and my heart to please consider reaching out to the 3 top energy players in the Oklahoma, Tulsa space and asking them to underwrite a program on the centennial 2023 of the first international oil exposition in the United States, which was, of course, anchored in Tulsa. And this new, to pick up on the word you used a very short while ago, Michelle, energy, a new energy around Tulsa truth. 2 5-letter words that add up to 10. And I think that could be a really profound beginning of revelation, reconciliation, restitution, realization, and ultimately a rejoining of the past in the present to make the future real and right. So I look forward, Michelle, my belle, to hearing about Tulsa Truth 2023 and you being there. Thank you.
Thank you, Francie. You're
And
fantastic. You're fantastic. And yeah, okay, thank you.
yeah, I want to thank Francie, Juhan, Xavier, Javier, Tila, and everyone else for really participating today in the discussion. And of course, thank you to Michelle and Byron for being here, sharing your experiences and being so open in this conversation. Before we close out the space, I also just want to share a few links with you all. So in terms of the Lewis Latimer House Museum, we have a website and resources actually on Lewis Latimer's story, so you can learn more about that there, as well as our newsletter and about the documentary as well. And I just want to make sure to share those because we also don't want the conversation to end there. We want this to really continue, right? Like new collaborations that could happen after this conversation. Michelle, would you be okay if I share your email here with everyone? And Byron, would you like to share your contact information as well if folks would like to connect with you?
Absolutely, share my email.
Yes.
And hopefully, Francie, I tried to get down what you were saying, and I would love if you could email me that. I'd appreciate it.
Will do.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much.
Yeah, so all the links are in the chat, for folks, in case you're just listening in. We'll also share those out on our Eventbrite after event email. So, we really want this to be a starting point rather than an end to the conversation, right? Like, there is more that could be done, and I don't want me to have the last word. So I'll pass it back to Byron and Michelle. Is there any one message you would like folks to take away from today's conversation? And then we will end the space.
I just want to keep the conversation going, and if anyone needs voiceover work, I'm happy to narrate as a descendant, or just to help small businesses, whatever. So just reach out. I'm open to conversations and helping conversations and storytelling. So thank you so much. And thank you, Roxy, and to the Latimer House and Ran for having us and for hosting this. It's incredible and I appreciate it. And it's an honor to be a part of this, and as far as the Latimer House as well. So thank you.
Likewise, thank you so much. And I just I'm appreciative of you all for being so engaged and asking these beautiful questions, because honestly, when I started this out, I felt like Michelle was saying, it's like you want to get in the statistics, but then like just coming back to your own personal experience and sharing with others and having them share theirs is deeply gratifying and healing. So thank you for that. Yeah, and remember to rest. Rest is radical.
Yes.
Work all the time.
Thank you all so much. And we'll end the call there. Hope to be in touch, and everyone stay safe and well. Bye.